Just because the arms aren't straightened in breaststroke doesn't mean the finish of the stroke is any less important. In fact, it's just as important in breaststroke as it is in every other stroke, and it's important for the same reasons. Swimmers have to create as much propulsion as possible, all while managing the transition into the recovery, and the more effectively they can do it, the faster they'll swim. Hi everyone, Andrew here, helping you help your swimmers go faster. In many ways, the finish of the pull in breaststroke is more difficult to manage in the other strokes because it doesn't have as clearly defined an ending. Just like every other stroke, swimmers have to move water backwards in order to move themselves forwards, but in breaststroke, they have to recover the arms under the water versus over the water. That means swimmers have to cut the stroke short in order to transition to the underwater recovery, but knowing exactly when and how to make that happen is more challenging. That being said, the trade-offs remain the same. The further swimmers can pull back, the more propulsion they will create, but the further they pull back, the further they're going to have to recover the arms under the water to get back out to the front of the stroke. And because the arms are going to be moving against the resistance of the water, that's going to create a whole lot of drag, which is going to slow swimmers down. And to make matters worse, because of that drag, it's going to take a lot longer to get the hands out in front. That's obviously going to have a negative impact on stroke rate, but it also makes it much more difficult to execute effective timing. And in breaststroke, timing is everything. So swimmers definitely don't want to do anything that makes executing great timing more challenging. There's one more aspect of the finish that's unique to breaststroke that's also a consequence of recovering the arms under the water. In order to smoothly transition from the arms moving backwards to forwards, swimmers are going to have more of a lateral component to their pull, especially the end of the pull, in order to get the elbows in so that the hands are forward so that everything can move forward. The more effective that lateral component of the finish, the more effectively swimmers are going to be able to create propulsion for as long as possible and smoothly transition into the recovery. So we have the same trade-offs here during the finish, just like we do in the other strokes, but by adding the underwater recovery, we've added a new dynamic to it. Let's take a look at how elite swimmers solve that problem. So we'll take a look at everything with a couple different swimmers from a couple different angles to get a broader sense of what's happening. The first thing to pay attention to here is we'll see is that the elbows basically come into the body. The elbows tend not to move past the torso or behind the torso, and they tend not to end up in front of the torso. And the reason that is just like in the other strokes, swimmers are powering the pull by bringing the elbows into the body. They're opening their armpit and then they're closing their armpit, and that's what's creating a lot of the power that moves them down the pool. And so we're gonna see that same thing here, is that the elbows do need to be brought into the side, and that movement is powered by the chest muscles, the pecs, and the back muscles, the lats, and those are going to be the strongest muscles in the upper body. So that's why swimmers use this motion, is because it allows them to take advantage of those muscles. So again, and so if the swimmer was to pull here and the elbows would end up behind her torso, she's not going to be using those stronger muscles. She's not going to be creating much propulsion by that point because the forearms and the hands, as you can see here, are no longer facing backwards. So to continue to pull back is just moving the arms backwards. We're not getting much more propulsion, but we're going to make it a lot more difficult to recover the arms forward here. And you can see the elbow, the upper arm is in line with the torso. And so she's got to move everything forwards from here. And so if she was even further back than she was right now, that's going to be that much more movement she's got to make forward against the resistance of the water. So if we take a look at the pull again here, and let's say that she only brought her arms about that far back, and so the elbows are still in front of the body, well, she's not creating as much propulsion as she could. It'll be a little bit easier to recover the arms forward. There won't be as much resistance. It won't take as much time, but in that case, she'd be sacrificing propulsion. And so again, it's the trade-off. How much propulsion can swimmers create? How little drag can they subject themselves to when they have to recover the arms forward? And a lot of that is going to be about finding the sweet spot. And what's the sweet spot? It tends to be bringing the upper arm, the elbows, in line with the torso. That's going to allow them to use the strongest muscles of the upper body as much as possible. She's able to get her forearms and her hands facing backwards for as long as possible. And so she's still in a good propulsive position here. And then she's transitioning into the recovery at that point. And so right when she's about to lose that position, right when she's about to no longer be able to pull backwards with the strongest muscles, that's when she transitions forward. And you can see that there's going to be a rounding. The elbows come into the body, there's that lateral component, the hands start to turn up, and then everything is going to be recovered forward. So the more that swimmers can figure out how to pull back effectively, how to pull back optimally, not too far, not too little, and then round off that pull in order to transition into the recovery, that's going to be the ideal goal. And in terms of rounding off the pull itself, if we get into this position right here, this is basically a butterfly pull. And so during butterfly, what the swimmers would do is they just continue to pull straight back. And if it was a butterfly pull, what swimmers would do is they'd continue to pull back, they'd straighten the arms. Whereas here, she's going to get to this position and then she's going to squeeze in as opposed to squeezing back. And so that's going to still create some propulsion, but it's also going to transition her into the recovery so it can be as smooth as possible. Again, if she was just to pull back and then try to move the hands forward, that's going to cause a problem because she's going to get stuck with the hands way lower than she wants. So she's going to get into an effective setup of the stroke, very similar to butterfly, and then instead of pulling straight back, it's going to be more of a squeeze in, which again, will still move the arms backwards, but there's that lateral component, which again, sets her up to recover the arms forwards as smoothly and as effortlessly as possible. So we're going to watch a different swimmer here from a different angle to gain a different perspective. So he's going to set up the stroke here, and then this is kind of the butterfly position that we just saw in the previous video. And from here, squeezing in, and so you can see the armpit is really open there. There's a ton of space between his upper arm and his torso, and then that space is going to gradually close. The elbows are going to be brought in, and you can see the upper arm is more or less level with the torso. He's not going to bring the arms completely in because that's going to make it more difficult to recover forwards. But then from here, now he can just transition everything forwards and he's back into the next stroke cycle. And so same dynamics as we just saw with the other swimmer, just from a different angle. So we've got the most propulsive part of the pull right here. Then he's going to squeeze in with it. That's going to be the transition to get the arms forward while still pulling back. You can see the upper arm is still moving back. The hands are still pointed down towards the bottom of the pool. The forearm is facing backwards, squeezing in. And then once he's run out of squeeze, basically, everything starts to move forwards. And that's going to allow him to, one, recover smoothly, but two, create as much propulsion as possible. And the key thing here is to watch how everything is smooth. The hands don't rush in, the elbows don't rush in, everything's patient, everything's moving as a unit, and then he shoots everything forwards after that. So creating as much propulsion as possible by pulling for as long as possible, using as big a surface area as possible, and then using the strongest muscles of the upper body, the pecs, the lats. And as he starts to lose effective propulsive positions and he starts to run out of room to move the arm back, then he starts transitioning everything in and he starts to move everything forward with the recovery. So relatively simple skill in terms of what needs to happen, not necessarily easy in terms of executing it because swimmers have to figure out how much is optimal, too little, not enough propulsion, too much, compromised recovery. And it's all about finding the sweet spot and making that happen as effectively as possible. Another swimmer here using the same basic skill set, adapting it to their own physiology and their own structure. So we'll watch here is there's going to be a pull in and you can see elbow is in line with the torso, the upper arm is in line with the torso, and then he's going to transition forward there. So he's creating as much propulsion as he can through the pull there. And again, once he runs out of room, once he brings the arm into the body, then he's going to transition forward with the recovery. And so during the pull, there's going to be this portion that's moving everything back. And once he runs out of surface area, right about there, once he runs out of room to pull into the body, that's where he's going to start to transition, get the hands up, get everything moving forwards, back into the front of the stroke, and ready for the next stroke cycle. So we've taken a look at 3 different breaststrokers. They all use the same basic skill set. They express it slightly different because they're different swimmers and they're very physically different, all 3 of them. Yet they're going to use the same basic strategy, which is trying to pull for as long as possible. But then as soon as they run out of the opportunity or the ability to keep the arm facing backwards, they're going to make sure that they're transitioning into the recovery. And once they lose the ability to pull back because they've brought the arm to the side, again, that's going to facilitate the transition. And rather than trying to pull back as hard as possible, everything is moving into, they're squeezing in. 1, because that allows them to power the pull, but 2, it allows them to smoothly transition into the recovery. So a huge part of the finish in breaststroke is finding the optimal time to make sure that the pull is cut off and making sure that the transition from the pull to the recovery is as smooth as possible. That allows swimmers to create as much propulsion as possible, create as little resistance as possible, and that allows them to create as much speed as possible. For more information about how to develop an effective breaststroke pull, check out the video below.